He thought firing me on day one would prove his authority. Instead, it revealed something he never saw coming: the cracks in his own empire. I stayed quiet, collected every mistake, and waited for the moment when his ego would hand me the perfect stage. I met my new boss 8 minutes before he decided my career should end over a painted rectangle on asphalt. He didn't introduce himself. He introduced his ego: shiny shoes, louder watch, monogrammed coffee mug that had not yet met our office dishwasher. I'd parked in his space, which was not actually his because facilities hadn't reassigned anything yet. Technicality? He preferred theatrics. He stood beside my Nissan like a traffic cop in a prestige drama and announced I was fired for undermining executive hierarchy. Cute phrase. Did he know I'd been the department's top performer for 6 years, the only person with a consistent 98% client retention, and the one who actually trained the last 3 managers? I asked if he'd read my personnel file. He smiled like a guy auditioning for the role of condescending nephew at Thanksgiving. Was that the first time I realized we were doing improv together? Maybe. But tell me, what kind of leader makes a spectacle in the parking lot before learning anyone's name? And what was he trying so hard to distract from? He handed me a separation packet that still smelled like fresh toner and told me to leave my badge at reception. Today? I said, as if I was confused. I wasn't. I was busy cataloging everything he had just told me without realizing it. He leads with punishment. He assumes compliance. He hasn't met a contract clause he can't trip over. Would it shock you to learn I wrote one of those clauses? The one legal nicknamed the boomerang? I slid the packet into my tote like it was a takeout menu I didn't order and decided I'd leave, eventually. Because who walks out in the middle of a magic trick before the reveal? Besides, what did he forget about how our clients actually pick up the phone? Inside, the office hummed with Monday optimism, the kind that says we're thriving until the numbers have opinions. My team stared like I'd shown up to prom in a spacesuit. I shrugged. Executive hierarchy, I said, and half the bullpen snorted because they knew that phrase only lives in PowerPoints and fragile hearts. My inbox dinged, 7 client emails asking for me by name, 2 calendar invites I hadn't scheduled, and a note from HR reminding managers to avoid decisive actions on day 1. Oh? Who forwarded that memo to the entire leadership thread at 8:02 a.m.? And who is still blind copying me after all? I walked to reception, smiled at the ficus I kept alive by threatening it with succulents, and set my badge down very carefully, like a chess piece. I'll pick it up later, I said to the desk associate, who blinked and mouthed later. I winked. Because what's the point of a door if you don't practice how it opens for you? And what if the door isn't the only thing with hinges? Back at my desk, the new boss, let's call him Parker since he loved parking, was doing a tour. He paused in front of my team and gestured to my chair like a game show host. This role will be evolving. Evolving into what, silence? He didn't notice my monitor was locked with a dashboard that spoke 12 dialects of margin. He didn't notice the client photos taped under the lip of my desk, their kids, their dogs, their launch day cupcakes, because he didn't know loyalty looks like frosting stains on a phone case. He did notice the framed note from the CEO thanking me for saving the quarter, then declared offices should be merit-based. Oh, Parker, who do you think wrote the playbook you're reciting like a bedtime story? And why did he flinch when I asked for the policy revision number? He herded people into a stand-up and praised fresh starts. Fresh like tearing out root systems. Fresh like forgetting a company's memory lives in human shortcuts, not org charts. I watched him parade an intern through a spreadsheet like it was a jungle gym. We'll be agile, he said, and the spreadsheet screamed waterfall. I took notes on his phrasing, the hedged verbs, the performative urgency, the way he said my clients, like he'd bought a planet. Did he realize our largest accounts were with founders who text me memes at 11:47 p.m. about their burn rate? And what would he do when those same founders asked where I'd gone? Before lunch, he sent facilities an urgent email about replacing my nameplate. He CC'd half the building and used a read receipt. I waited 3 beats, then replied all with one sentence. I'm happy to schedule an exit debrief to ensure continuity for clients A through H. 12 seconds later, my phone lit up with a call from client B. Are you moving? She asked, the way you ask if the pilot just swapped with a magician. I smiled into my voice. I've been invited to explore parking lot policy. She was quiet for a second, then said, "We don't hire you for your parking." Interesting, right? And what happens when a sentence like that repeats across a portfolio? Parker strutted past my door and gave me the universal sign for "wrap it up," which is adorable when performed by someone who hasn't found the copy room yet. No concerns, I told client B, just a temporary signage issue. When we hung up, I wrote a list titled "Signage" and, underneath it, names. Not because I plan to poach, please, I don't need to steal what looks for me, but because I track patterns and patterns eventually file HR complaints of their own. Also, a small item. The onboarding pack Parker forced into my tote? I hadn't read it, but I had weighed it. A termination packet isn't heavy unless it's a template. A template means he came to swing, not to see. And where do templates break first? I took a walk through the floor. When people heard I'd been fired, they reacted in two ways: a startled, "How?" from those who measure value with rulers, and a calm, "When do we meet?" from those who measure it with results. I told them I was fine. I was better than fine. I was patient. "Let him do 3 staff emails," I said to my favorite analyst. "He'll tell us who he is." She tilted her head. "You already know." I did. He was a man who thought a reserve sign had more authority than a relationship. He was a man who believed a parking space proved ownership of land, of people, of outcomes. He was a man who didn't ask why the biggest client insisted our quarterly reviews include cupcakes with lemon zest, because I'm allergic to almond, and they remembered. And when people remember your allergies, what else do they remember? At 3 p.m., Parker called me into a conference room to formalize. He sat at the head with the confidence of a cat occupying a laptop. HR joined by speakerphone, the way HR does when they want to see how a story ends without touching it. "We're parting ways," he said, and slid a pen across the table like a judge. I didn't touch it. "Understood," I said, and watched him relax just enough to reveal a seam. "One thing," I added, "about Section 14C. He frowned. "Which is?" I opened my notebook, not the one with doodles, the one with receipts. "The continuity and transition safeguard," I said lightly. HR cleared her throat. Parker blinked like a Wi-Fi signal. "It ensures that when a key relationship manager is separated without cause, the company provides a 60-day overlap or compensates for client turnover risk in line with trailing 12 months. It was approved last year." He started to say it wasn't relevant. I raised a finger. "Unless you can demonstrate cause supported by performance reviews you haven't read." Tiny silence. Could you hear it? The part where theater meets paperwork? And what do egos do when paper refuses to applaud? He changed tactics, offered a small severance and a glowing letter. I thanked him. I also asked to schedule the 60-day overlap meetings for the good of the clients. HR liked that phrase. Parker did not. Because what happens when you invite sunlight to a garden labeled mine? He wrapped the meeting with a tight smile and said my last day was effective immediately. I nodded as if calendars bend for logic. HR reminded him about badges. I reminded him about Section 14C. We left in a 3-way truce none of us believed in. Back at my desk, I wrote 3 emails, to my team, to facilities, thanking them for temporary signage while leadership transitions, and to myself, yes, to myself, time delayed, subject line, remember who you are the moment someone forgets. Corny? Maybe. Effective? Always. Then I did something small and loud. I placed that separation packet on top of my desk, spine out, like a library book daring someone to read it. People walked by and did double takes. "You okay?" they asked. "Better," I said. Because what is a parking spot if not a stage? And what do audiences do when the wrong person takes the spotlight? At 4:41 p.m., my phone chimed with a text from Client D, "We need you Thursday." Non-negotiable. I stared at it long enough to feel the floor tilt. I didn't reply. Not because I wouldn't, because I wanted to see who else arrived to the party they hadn't been invited to. At 4:49 p.m., Client F, "He can keep the asphalt. We want the architect." I laughed, out loud, for the first time all day. The ficus leaned in to hear the joke. I picked up my tote, waved to the bullpen, and headed for the elevator. Did I feel scared? Briefly. Did I feel finished? Not even close. Because the thing about humiliation is that it hates witnesses, and I had a building full. The elevator doors slid shut like theater curtains. He fired me over a parking spot, I told my reflection, and parked me exactly where I needed to be. The doors opened to the lobby, where Parker was giving a pep talk to a group of executives who hadn't learned his name yet. He saw me and tried on authority. "You're still here." I smiled like a person who knows where the stage lights are. "Just leaving," I said, and stepped into the perfect echo of marble and timing. Did I mention the board meets Wednesday? Did I mention the invited client representatives to celebrate new leadership? Did I mention who traditionally gives the portfolio tour? I didn't need to. I only needed to tilt my head toward my tote, where a certain clause lived beside a very recent string of texts. How many chairs do you think will be empty when the room realizes who actually carries the map, and what will Parker do when he learns I haven't even opened my glove box yet? 2 days after the parking spot execution, Parker strutted through the office like he'd inherited Rome. My photo was still on the client excellence wall, and every time he walked past it, he looked like the portrait had insulted his haircut. Did he really believe clients wouldn't notice my sudden disappearance? And how long can a secret stay quiet in an office full of whispers? By Friday, the phones had a new rhythm. "Where's she and who's taking over?" Parker waved it off, saying I was pursuing opportunities. Cute. The only opportunity one was pursuing was watching him burn bridges with gasoline he thought was water. Clients weren't fooled. Loyalty doesn't live in a company logo, it lives in who remembers their kid's soccer score. And who had the jersey framed on her desk? Exactly. Enter Chad, Parker's golden pick. Chad thought ROI was a Wi-Fi setting and once asked out loud, "What's EBITDA again?" The bullpen stared like he'd just declared gravity optional. Did Parker know his protege couldn't spell client without autocorrect? And how long before clients noticed? Then client B called. He quoted numbers from the wrong year, she whispered, laughing. Imagine paying for leadership and getting amateur night. And what happens when your own spreadsheets outsmart the boss? Parker's solution? Rearranging desks. He called it agility. Translation: musical chairs for staplers. Everyone humored him, but their eyes kept sliding to my empty seat. Funny thing about empty seats, sometimes they speak louder than full ones. Week 2 brought a town hall. Picture TED Talk, but with typos. Parker bragged about his workflows, mine, actually, and mispronounced EBITDA as EBITDA. Chad chimed in with ROI. Clients muted themselves so fast you'd think Zoom invented eject buttons. And what's louder than silence? Clients drafting Plan B. Afterward, texts lit up my phone. "We miss your brain." I saved them in a folder called Echoes. Because sometimes you don't chase loyalty, it chases you. Parker doubled down with late-night emails full of buzzwords. My favorite typo? "We must maximize our clintal." Clintal, as if he'd invented a medieval illness. Staff screenshotted it like it was a collectible. And what does it mean when your employees turn your emails into memes? By the end of week 2, finance flagged accounts as at risk, HR asked for a client engagement plan, and Parker sent a deck with clip art arrows and a misspelled Steve Jobs quote. Even the ficus in the lobby looked disappointed. Here's the truth. I didn't ask clients to follow me. I didn't need to. Trust doesn't transfer like a password, it sticks. And when one of our biggest clients skipped Parker's celebration lunch, leaving a very obvious empty chair, everyone in that room knew whose absence mattered. And what happens when silence takes a seat at the table? By week 2, the cracks in his empire weren't just visible, they were invitations. And I'd already RSVP'd. By week 3, Parker walked through the office like a man convinced he was starring in a documentary about leadership. The only problem? Everyone else thought they were watching a comedy. He kept declaring the ship stable, which is hilarious if you enjoy metaphors about boats that are already taking on water. Did he notice the way finance flinched whenever he said, "Profit margins are secure"? Not a chance. And how long can you brag about smooth sailing when people in the back are already strapping on life vests? That's when I decided it was time to set a trap. Not an aggressive ambush, that's too obvious. This was going to be subtle, elegant, and oh so ironic. If Parker wanted to play captain, I'd simply provide the iceberg. Because here's the truth about arrogance, it always steers itself into disaster. My job was just to make sure the lights were on when it happened. I didn't cold call a single client. I didn't whisper about leaving. I didn't even suggest there were greener pastures. I simply answered the questions Parker couldn't. Coffee shops, quiet dinners, even a walk in the park, clients wanted to know what was happening, and all I did was nod at their concerns. "How are things inside?" they'd ask. I'd smile. "Depends," I'd say. "Do you like watching PowerPoints explode?" They'd laugh, then sigh, then lean in. And what happens when sighs turn into secrets? Meanwhile, I kept my own private little ledger. Not of dollars, of broken promises. Every time Parker failed a deadline, missed a call, or delivered synergy instead of solutions, I wrote it down. Did it look petty? Maybe. Did it read like a prophecy? Absolutely. Because when the moment came, this ledger would become scripture. And who doesn't love a dramatic reading when the lights are brightest? Then fate, or incompetence, handed me a gift. Parker's new assistant, clearly overwhelmed, accidentally forwarded me an internal slide deck. A preview of his upcoming leadership showcase. Let me tell you, it was art. Inflated numbers, fabricated growth percentages, and a claim of 40% increase in retention, when the real number hovered at 4. 4. Did I grin like a cat in a cream factory? Naturally. Because what's more delicious than holding the match before someone else strikes it? Around the office, morale had turned into theater. Analysts whispered, interns chuckled, and someone had started a Parker bingo card. Squares included, mispronounces EBITDA, mentions synergy twice in one sentence, and blames IT for his own typo. I heard someone shout bingo on Wednesday before lunch. Was that team building? Or mutiny disguised as humor? And what happens when the jokes stop being funny and start being accurate? I didn't need to convince clients of anything, they were convincing themselves. Client B called again. He introduced me to Chad as my new contact, and Chad called my company Your Brand LLC. We're incorporated. He doesn't know what incorporated means, does he? What could I say? He thinks ROI is spelled RY. She laughed so hard I thought her headset might short-circuit. That wasn't loyalty to Parker. That was survival comedy. And the whispers grew. Client F asked for me off record. "Are you coming back?" they asked, leaning forward like confessing a crime. "Because if you're not in the room, we won't be either." That sentence landed like a signed contract. I wasn't their employee, I was their insurance policy. And what do clients do when their insurance disappears? They shop elsewhere. Meanwhile, Parker was rehearsing. Every time I passed the glass conference room, he was inside practicing his vision speech. He even taped little notes to the back of his slides, reminders to pause here and smile at jokes. Did anyone tell him the sticky notes were visible to the audience from certain angles? Not me. Why ruin the blooper reel before opening night? So I sharpened my silence. No dramatic exits. No angry speeches. Just patience. Because the board had scheduled a grand event, a leadership showcase, where Parker would demonstrate his impact. Clients were invited. Staff were encouraged. The whole building buzzed like opening night at a bad Broadway play. And me? I'd be there, quietly sitting in the audience with my ledger of promises, my folder of client texts, and a certain clause glowing in the background of my mind. I knew exactly how it would go. Parker would strut on stage, bask in applause he thought belonged to him, and then he'd stumble. Because the board wasn't looking for charisma, they were looking for competence. And when the client started asking real questions, the kind only I had the answers to, his facade would crack like thin glass under pressure. And what happens when an entire room hears the shatter all at once? The night before the showcase, I sat at my kitchen table with everything laid out. Ledger. Clause 14, C. Emails from clients practically begging for clarity. Did I feel nervous? Briefly. Did I feel prepared? More than ever. Because Parker thought he'd written me out of the script. What he didn't realize was that the audience hadn't forgotten their favorite character. And in theater, when the understudy fails, who gets called back? Monday morning arrived with too much coffee and too many fake smiles. The auditorium gleamed, chairs lined in perfect rows, catering trays steaming like props for optimism. Parker adjusted his tie in the reflective glass, grinning at himself like he was the headliner at Carnegie Hall. Chad sat in the front row, nodding furiously, clearly rehearsing his role as supportive sidekick. Staff filled in the back rows, whispering behind programs. Clients arrived slowly, scanning the room. And yes, some looked relieved the moment they spotted me quietly sitting near the aisle. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I just smiled faintly. Because the stage was ready, the audience was primed, and the trap was set. Parker thought this was his coronation. He didn't realize it was his curtain call. All I needed now was a stage, and Parker's ego had already booked the theater. The morning of the leadership showcase felt less like a corporate event and more like the first act of a courtroom drama. The stage was set, literally. The auditorium gleamed under fluorescent lights, chairs neatly aligned like obedient soldiers, and a projector humming with the nervousness of a rookie actor. Parker hovered at the podium, rehearsing his opening smile in the reflective glass panel. If confidence had a cologne, he was drowning in it. But here's the question. Does confidence count if everyone else can smell panic beneath it? Staff filtered in first, settling into the back rows with the enthusiasm of students forced to attend detention. I noticed the Parker bingo cards tucked into notebooks. Yes, they brought them to the showcase. One square read, mentions synergy more than twice, another forgets a client's name. How many would they check before lunch? Clients arrived next, each taking a seat with polite smiles, but their eyes searched the room for something or someone. When they saw me quietly seated on the aisle, a few shoulders visibly relaxed. Interesting, right? And what happens when relief enters the room before the speaker starts talking? The board filed in, trying to look supportive but already clutching their pens like weapons. They weren't here for theater. They were here for answers. Parker didn't notice. He was too busy adjusting his tie, patting his notes, and whispering to Chad, who nodded so aggressively it looked like his head might detach. Parker even rehearsed his pause for applause moment. The irony? The only applause so far had been for the catering team bringing in coffee. Finally, the lights dimmed. Parker strutted to the center stage as if expecting a standing ovation. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed, "to a new era of leadership." He clicked his remote, and the first slide appeared. A graph shot upward like a rocket, two upward. Anyone with math skills could see the line was more fiction than fact. Did Parker think nobody in this room owned a calculator? And what happens when your first number raises more eyebrows than revenue? He launched into buzzwords. Synergy. Check. Optimization. Check. Paradigm shift. Bingo, literally. I saw an analyst quietly fist pump in the back row. The room didn't laugh, but the silence had weight. Clients leaned forward, board members scribbled notes, and Parker, oblivious, marched ahead like a parade with no audience. Then came the first stumble. A client executive raised a hand. "Those retention figures, you're claiming 40%. Could you walk us through how that's measured?" Parker froze for half a second, then flashed his rehearsed smile. "Of course. We calculate based on, evolving metrics." Evolving metrics? That's not a phrase. It's an excuse in a tuxedo. The executive frowned. Another board member asked, "And who verified this data?" Parker blurted, "Finance." The head of finance crossed her arms so tight you could hear fabric strain. Did he just blame finance in front of finance? And how many lifelines does one man get before the rope runs out? He fumbled to the next slide, but it only got worse. The projector displayed a chart with numbers so inflated they practically floated. One client leaned over to another and whispered, loud enough for half the room, "Those can't be real." Parker's cheeks flushed crimson. He stammered about aspirational projections. Aspirational? As in, not actually true? I bit my lip to keep from laughing. And when the audience laughs at you instead of with you, how long before they leave? Chad tried to rescue him, piping up with, "What Parker means is ROI. I mean, return on investment." He tripped over the acronym so badly that a board member tilted her head like a disappointed ant. Parker snapped, "Thank you, Chad," and hustled to the next slide. Except he forgot to remove his sticky notes. Everyone could see the little yellow square taped in the corner. "Smile here." Oh, he smiled, all right. The audience didn't. By now, clients weren't even pretending. One crossed their arms, another scribbled in a notebook, and one bold soul pulled out their phone mid-presentation. Board members exchanged glances like referees debating when to blow the whistle. And there I was, sitting quietly with my ledger of broken promises, waiting for the moment the stage would collapse under its own weight. And collapse it did. Client F raised their hand. "Parker, last month you promised delivery on Phase 2. Where are we with that?" Parker blinked. "Phase 2 is progressing smoothly." Wrong answer. I watched as Client F slowly shook their head. We haven't had a single update. Not even an email. The board's pen stopped moving. The silence was thick enough to spread on toast. Did Parker really think bluster could replace delivery? And what happens when the bluff is called in public? He tried pivoting, but the questions kept coming. Who signed off on these projections? Why are invoices delayed? Where is the continuity plan? Each question landed like a hammer, and Parker scrambled like a man juggling glass. His voice cracked once, then twice. He looked at Chad, who was staring down at his notes like they might magically sprout answers. Spoiler, they didn't. Then came the moment of no return. One client turned to me, in front of everyone, and asked, "Can you confirm if these numbers align with what we discussed last quarter?" The room shifted. All eyes swung toward me, the supposedly fired manager. Parker stiffened, his mouth opening like a fish out of water. My heart thumped once, but I kept my face calm. "What I can confirm," I said smoothly, "is that consistency matters. And the data should always reflect reality, not aspiration." A murmur rippled through the audience. Did I just politely dismantle his entire presentation in one sentence? Yes. Yes, I did. Parker flushed red, tried to laugh it off, and muttered something about context. But the board wasn't smiling. Clients weren't smiling. Even the staff in the back row looked like they were watching the final round of a boxing match. By the time Parker reached his closing slide, "The future is bright," half the room looked ready to dim the lights permanently. No applause followed his rehearsed bow. Just silence. Heavy, undeniable silence. And me? I sat quietly, notebook closed, knowing exactly what came next. Because humiliation hates witnesses, and Parker had just humiliated himself in front of everyone that mattered. When he tried to throw me under the bus didn't stop, it backed up, honked twice, and rolled right over him. When the showcase ended, the silence clung to Parker like static. No applause, no nods, not even polite coughs, just the sound of reputations collapsing in real time. He adjusted his tie as if fabric could rescue credibility. Did he really think he could charm his way out of math? And what happens when even numbers refuse to lie for you? The board dismissed us for refreshments, which was corporate code for damage control. Clients swarmed toward me. Not Parker. One executive shook my hand, whispering, "We need continuity." "Your continuity." Another leaned in. "If you start something new, call us first." Parker pretended not to notice, but his jaw twitched like a faulty printer. Wasn't this the same man who fired me over a parking spot? Now 80% of his clients were circling me like I was the exit sign. Back at the office, the fallout began. Contracts stalled, renewals paused, invoices questioned. Parker tried daily pep talks, but staff nodded with the enthusiasm of houseplants. The ficus in the lobby looked more motivated. Chad attempted client calls, mispronouncing revenue stream as revenue screen. Honestly, accurate. And what does it say when your backup plan makes things worse? Meanwhile, I was busy. Not sabotaging, not scheming, simply listening. Clients invited me to lunches, coffees, whispered dinners. "We don't trust him," they said. "We trust you." I never promised anything. I didn't need to. Because trust doesn't require a sales pitch, it requires memory. And they remembered who answered at midnight, who fixed problems before they exploded, who cared enough to know their kids' names. The final blow came at the quarterly board meeting. Clients brought up transition risk. The board asked Parker to explain retention again. He stuttered. Finance rolled their eyes. Then one executive asked the magic question, "If she leaves, how many accounts leave with her?" Parker scoffed. "She's replaceable." The room went quiet. I didn't have to speak, clients spoke for me. 80%, one said flatly. "We'd walk." The words landed like a gavel. 80%. Not a threat, not a negotiation, just fact. Parker's face drained of color. He looked at me, the woman he humiliated over asphalt, and realized he'd paved his own downfall. And how fast can a career skid when the ground disappears beneath it? Within weeks, I had offers, real ones. Some clients wanted me to start my own firm. Others offered positions with more zeros than I'd ever seen. I chose carefully, strategically. But the sweetest moment wasn't the contracts or the pay raise or even the new office with, yes, my own reserved parking spot. It was the look on Parker's face the morning I walked out, escorted not by security but by clients themselves. As I passed him in the lobby, he muttered, "You'll regret this." I smiled. Funny. That's exactly what your parking sign said. The elevator doors closed before he could reply. And here's the moral. Never underestimate the person you try to humiliate. You might think you're kicking them out, but sometimes you're just giving them a bigger stage. Parker fired me over a parking spot. In the end, that spot was empty, his office was emptier, and I was already driving into a future he couldn't afford to imagine. He thought he'd claimed a parking space. Instead, he cleared the entire lot for me.